Good morning, third graders. I hope you're all well and still doing your schoolwork at home. And pretty soon, before you know it, we'll have nice weather again. So, anyway, I'm ready to read the next installment of our book that we're doing together, Summer of the Woods. And today I'm going to read to you chapters 7 and 8. So, chapter 7, The Night. The heat wave broke by the end of the week, just as their dad had predicted. Late Friday afternoon, Dad drove Sam and Derek up an old access road to the field that lay past the woods behind their house. The boys helped gather firewood, and before long, the three were seated around a glowing campfire. Marshmallows. Pass the chocolate, please, said Sam. He squeezed the gooey treat onto a sandwich of graham crackers and chocolate and shoved it into his mouth. These are so good. Hey, Sam, watch this, called Derek. He reached his roasting stick deep into the bottom of the hot embers and held it there for 2 seconds. Poof! The white marshmallow on the end of his stick burst into a flaming fireball glowing in the darkness like a torch. On guard! Yelled Derek, and he held his flaming stick out like a sword fighter. He slashed the fiery ball back and forth in the air. Looked like a comet racing across the dark night sky. Watch out, said Sam. Derek, that's enough, said Dad. Your marshmallow's going to fly off and start a brush fire in the field. Or burn me to death. That would be even worse, said Sam. Well, yes, that would be worse. You're right, answered Dad. Dad, could someone die from falling into a hole? Asked Sam. Well, I guess it depends on how deep the hole is, replied Dad. Do you mean like a pit? I guess that could be pretty deep, and someone could get badly hurt or killed. You need to make good decisions and stay away from deep holes. What about quicksand? Suggested Derek, trying to change the subject. Someone at school last year told me that in the jungle, there's something called quicksand. And if you step in it, before you know it, you're sucked into your doom. We don't live in the jungle, Derek, said Sam. I don't see any gorillas, do you? No, but there's a snake. Look out! Derek shouted and pretended to run in panic. Where? Screamed Sam as he jumped up in the air. Derek doubled over in laughter. Ha! Gotcha, Sam. That's for tricking me in the creek the other day. Not funny, Derek, yelled Sam. Okay, boys, relax, said Dad. Derek, there's no quicksand in Virginia, so you don't need to worry about that. Sam, why are you thinking about falling into deep holes? Did you see one? Well, someone said there are old mines in Virginia. Is that true? Virginia's new to me too, answered Dad. But I think there were coal mines in this part of the country years ago. I'm not sure if they were around here, though. You certainly don't want to go around one of those. They're not safe. Mr. Haskins said that, started Sam, but Derek reached over and kicked his leg hard. He shot his younger brother a fierce look through the firelight. What was that? Asked Dad. Oh, nothing, Derek chimed in. Mr. Haskins said to be careful about snakes, and Sam is paranoid about them. Well, maybe if you didn't always try to scare him, he wouldn't be so worried, suggested Dad. Okay, let's finish up the s'mores so we can get things put away. They picked up the chocolate wrappers and boxes of food from around the fire and carried them and the rest of the supplies over to the van that was parked behind their tent. When everything was put away, Dad took a long stick and spread the remaining burning logs around the fire pit so they'd burn down safely. Okay, guys, it's late. Let's head into the tent and get ready for bed. The boys climbed into the tent, pulled off their socks and t-shirts, and slid into their sleeping bags. The air was warm in the darkness. Derek unzipped his sleeping bag halfway down the side so he wouldn't get too hot. Since it was a clear night, Dad pulled back the rain flap from the top of the tent so the breeze could flow through. They all stared up at the sky from their pillows through the mesh top of the tent. A cloud slowly eased to the west, and the brightness of the moon crept out little by little. Soon the cloud was gone, and a round yellow moon stared down at them. The creaks and clicks of the woods all around were now cast in a hazy glow by the moonbeams. Wow, that's cool, said Derek. The man on the moon is shining down on us tonight, whispered Dad. What? Said Sam. The man on the moon, answered Dad. See him? What are you talking about, Dad? Asked Derek. I think you might have been standing a little too close to the fire. What? You can't see it? Said Dad. Look up there. See the dark moon craters and how they kind of look like a face? Oh, yeah. You're right. It does kind of look like that, said Derek. Where? I don't... Oh, yeah, I see it, said Sam. Cool. No, you don't. You just heard me say that, protested Derek. I do so, Derek. It's right there, shouted Sam. Enough, sighed Dad. Good night, boys. I love you. Good night, yawned Derek. Oh, good night, said Sam. They laid in silence for a few moments. Dad, are there really bears out here? Asked Sam. Good night, Sam, said Dad. We're fine. And he reached over and laid his arm over Sam's shoulder. The warm summer air filled the darkness, and the three campers drifted off to sleep listening to a night symphony of crickets and tree frogs. I need to adjust this just a little bit. There we go. Derek's eyes opened wide. What was that sound? He looked down and felt his brother's legs draped over the bottom of his sleeping bag and remembered that they were camping. He shoved Sam's leg back over to his sleeping bag and they fell with a thud. Sound asleep as always, marveled Derek. Then another blood-curdling screech poured out of the darkness. It sounded like a whistle or a weird rooster. Derek had never heard anything like it. It was really loud, like it was almost inside the tent. Hoo, hoo, hoo. Derek sat up in his sleeping bag and looked over for Dad. He could make out his sleeping figure still lying next to Sam. Derek pulled his watch from the side pocket of the tent and pushed the light button. 4:00 a.m. Still the middle of the night. But what was that sound? Hoo, hoo, hoo. There it was again. It was right on top of them. Dad, whispered Derek, but he still seemed to be sound asleep. Maybe that's where Sam got it from, thought Derek. Scared by the noise, but even more curious, Derek eased out of his sleeping bag. The air had grown cool, so he pulled on his sweatshirt and sneakers, picked up a flashlight, slipped out of the tent, and tiptoed over to the logs around the fire pit and listened. The night was so quiet. The crickets and tree frogs had stopped singing their songs, and everything was completely still. Hoo, hoo, hoo! Derek flipped his flashlight on, and his eyes followed the beam 10 feet up a tree branch above their tent. He found himself staring into two bright, huge eyes. It was an owl. And there's a picture of the owl. Whoa, muttered Derek. It looked like a great horned owl. He'd seen a picture of one in the animal book that Uncle Drew had given him on his birthday. Thought about waking up Dad and Sam, but decided it would be too hard to stir them out of their slumber. For a few seconds, they both sat there, the boy looking at the owl, who was looking back at the boy. Derek was almost afraid to exhale, as if breathing would send the owl away, or perhaps make it swoop down and grab him with his sharp talons, and all that would be left of him would be a pair of empty sneakers. The owl's feathery neck swiveled quickly to the side as if it read Derek's mind, and it spread its giant wings out wide. With one great thrust, it lifted into the air and flew right over Derek's head. He could hear the feathers pushing against the air, and he ducked down, even though the owl was well above him. He tried to follow the bird with his light, but it was gone, eaten up by the trees, and he was alone again in the night. Derek looked around at the woods in the glow of the moonlight. He reached his hand into the pockets of his sweatshirt to stay warm and realized that something was in there. It was the secret notebook. He'd been too groggy with sleep when he put it on to remember that he had brought it on the trip. He pulled it out and studied the map pages again under his light. He glanced over at the quiet tent. He looked up at the dark woods. An idea formed in his mind, and he wondered. And then, before his thoughts could waver, he stuffed the notebook back in his pocket, gripped his flashlight tight, and stepped through the canopy of trees and into the night. Chapter 8, The Cave. Even in the moonlight, the beam from Derek's flashlight seemed to be swallowed up by the dark only a few yards in front of him as he moved along the trail from the campsite. Everything looked so different at night, but he was pretty sure this route led along the southern edge of the fields and then down to the creek. He could follow the creek west to where they'd seen the boulder and run into those kids. He was certain that the Virginia Mining Company plaque next to the boulder was connected to the VMC on the secret box. The map had shown an entrance to a passageway. He guessed that there must be a cave or something down at the base of the boulder. That was probably where those guys had been playing when he and Sam stumbled upon them. He thought about the coins, the treasure, as he liked to think of it. Sure, it wouldn't be a huge chest with a mountain of gold and jewels like in pirate stories, but those rare coins would be a treasure nonetheless. Spooky dark branches waved at him as Derek walked along the trail. He tried not to think about what else might be lurking in the woods with him in the middle of the night. Was Dad serious that Mr. Haskins had seen bears? It was fun joking around to scare Sam, but now it didn't seem quite so funny. He pushed those thoughts out of his mind when he heard the faint gurgles of the creek up ahead, and soon his light rested on the familiar path by the running water and fallen logs. He followed the creek along its dips and curves, and soon recognized the small hill topped by the line of pine trees and the boulder. Derek shined his light on the metal plaque along the boulder once more and compared it to the one in his book. The V, M, and C letter designs matched perfectly. He carefully climbed back up the small ledges of the boulder. They seemed much steeper in the dark. At the top of the rock, he could see the first glimpse of dawn as light slowly formed on the horizon. He thought of Sam and Dad back at the tent and wondered if they had noticed he was gone yet. He knew Dad wouldn't be happy about him going off on his own. Sam would be mad that Derek had left him, even though he probably would have been too much of a scaredy cat to come anyway. He wondered if he'd made a bad decision. Dad was always talking to them about making wise decisions. But sometimes that was so boring, thought Derek. He followed a winding path down the back side of the boulder. When he reached the base, he turned and looked up. The giant rock towered over him and seemed even higher than it had from the top. It was still dark down in the valley, so Derek shined his light along the base of the rock. A narrow shadow was nestled behind a pine tree to his left. He moved his light up and down and saw that the shadow was a large crevice in the rock. Derek looked over his shoulder. Everything was still quiet except for a few birds beginning to chirp in the faint morning light. He took a deep breath and moved into the cave. He studied the notebook and then looked up the rock walls that surrounded him in the narrow passageway. The map showed the main tunnel winding all the way underneath the boulder. He seemed to be in the part of the cave where the other boys had been playing. An orange water gun leaned against the wall, and a few empty drink bottles were strewn about. Pretty cool spot, thought Derek. But that wasn't what he was interested in right then. He examined the map again. A second passageway opened halfway along the main one and then turned further underground to a small chamber. Derek hoped the coins would be there. He walked further into the cave and scanned the walls for a sign of the other entrance. The rocks were rough and jagged. He wondered what had been used to dig them out many years ago. probably picks and shovels, or maybe even dynamite, he guessed. Derek looked back and decided that he'd gone too far. He hadn't seen anything to indicate another passageway. He retraced his steps and inched forward more carefully until he noticed a smooth area along the inner part of the wall. It was only about 2 feet in diameter, and he'd missed it in his first time by. He pushed against the rock with his hands, but it was solid. And when he tried to kick the wall with his foot, his head bumped something sticking down from the ceiling. He turned around and felt what seemed like a tree root. It seemed out of place that far underground. Wondering if it might be something else, he gave it a tug, but nothing happened. He reached up again and hung on the wood with both hands, putting all his weight onto it. The root, or whatever it was, gave way, and Derek crashed to the ground and dropped his flashlight. "Ouch," groaned Derek, and he clutched his arm. In the darkness, he felt around the floor until he found his flashlight. He noticed a cool breeze against his face that hadn't been there before. He turned on the light and stared. Against the other wall was an open hole where the smooth area had been. The second passageway. He reached his arm into the space, and the beam from his flashlight faded around walls and out of sight. He jumped up and squeezed his shoulders through the hole as his heart beat like a jackhammer. Derek couldn't believe that he was this close. The air was chilled and stale-smelling as he stepped into the new tunnel. He pulled the notebook back out and traced his route with his finger. The second passage curved to the right, about 10 feet, and then appeared to go down. Down to what? Thought Derek as he walked forward and around the bend. He descended a series of crude stairs in the rock that made a tight spiral. He pressed ahead, feeling for the wall with his free hand. As he reached the bottom of the stairs, his light revealed a small but open room. The treasure chamber, thought Derek. He looked on the far wall and saw a wooden ledge built over a hole in the rock. It was almost like a shelf that had been cut out of the wall. And sitting on the ledge was a metal box. "Oh my gosh," whispered Derek as he imagined what could be in the box. He jumped when he heard the voices, kid voices, suddenly echoing through the cave. They were far away, but getting louder. Derek had been so excited about following the passageway that he hadn't heard them at first. And now that he did, he moved quickly and climbed up onto the ledge behind the old box to get out of sight. He slid to the back of the ledge and held still for what seemed a long time. The voices had faded, but he wanted to be sure they were gone. He peered over at the box, which sat only inches from his nose. Did treasure have a smell? Derek wondered. He didn't think so, but he definitely smelled something odd. He moved his flashlight up near his head and flicked on the light. A dead rat lay right in front of his face. "Ah!" screamed Derek, and he jumped back in surprise. As he did, the wooden ledge let out a loud crack and began to wobble. He tried to back up, but the boards began to break under his weight. The whole shelf shifted inward toward the wall, and the box slid backward. "Oh no," cried Derek, and he fell through the broken shelf on a pile of rocks. The old metal box crashed onto its side, barely missing his foot. The lid of the box flew open, and dozens of coins spilled out on the floor right in front of him. Derek's eyes opened wide, and he stared. "The coins!" he exclaimed. He shined his flashlight over the open box. There must be hundreds of them, he thought. Despite his situation, his mind raced with excitement. He picked up the one closest to him and held it under the light. The small coin was brownish color with a picture of a woman wearing a feather headdress. Derek's heart skipped a beat. It was an Indian head cent. He looked along the bottom edge of the coin. 1877, he read. "No way," whispered Derek. "It is a treasure." Derek leaned forward to pick up more of the coins when all of a sudden more rocks along the shelf above crumbled on top of him. His flashlight was knocked to the ground and the small space was enveloped in darkness. Derek gasped. His foot was caught under a heavy rock. He struggled to move but couldn't. His leg hurt. In the darkness, Derek thought about where he was and started to panic. In a cave, alone, and no one knew where he was. He listened for the other voices, but he couldn't hear them any longer. "Help!" cried Derek. "Somebody help me! Help!" The voice echoed through the rock passageways again and again, but no one called back. Derek closed his eyes and felt very alone. This was not how he wanted his treasure hunt to end. He wished he hadn't left the campsite alone, that he'd listened to Sam about things being too dangerous. He wished he'd followed Dad's advice to make good choices. He wished he had never found the secret compartment or even heard about the lost coins at all. And that brings us to chapter 9, which is where we will begin the next time I read to you. Get pretty exciting now. Well, I have a few poems to read that I think you will like. And remember, I know I've read them to you before. Okay, the first one is called How Not to Have to Dry the Dishes. If you have to dry the dishes, such an awful boring chore. If you have to dry the dishes instead of going to the store, if you have to dry the dishes and you drop one on the floor, maybe they won't let you dry the dishes anymore. Ah, you know this one. There she is. Mrs. McTwitter, the babysitter, I think she's a little bit crazy. She thinks a babysitter's supposed to sit upon the baby. Prayer of the Selfish Child. Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. And if I die before I wake, I pray the Lord my toys to break so none of the other kids can use them. Amen. Now that is a selfish kid. This one's called The Dragon of Grinly Grun. I don't know if I've read you this one before or not. And by the way, you're going to hear the words fair damsel, and that means a young girl, a young pretty girl. I'm the dragon of Grinly Grun. I breathe fire as hot as the sun. When a knight comes to fight, I just toast him on sight like a hot crispy cinnamon bun. When I see a fair damsel go by, I just sigh a fiery sigh. And she's baked like a tater. I think of her later with a romantic tear in my eye. I'm the dragon of Grinly Grun, but my lunches aren't very much fun. For I like my damsels medium rare, and they always come out well done. And here he is, and there's the damsel. Well, let's see here. Okay, this one's called Messy Room. Whosever room this is should be ashamed. His underwear is hanging on the lamp. His raincoat is there in the overstuffed chair, and the chair is becoming quite mucky and damp. His workbook is wedged in the window. His sweater's been thrown on the floor. His scarf and one ski are beneath the TV, and his pants have been carelessly hung on the door. His books are all jammed in the closet. His vest has been left in the hall. A lizard named Ed is asleep in his bed, and his smelly old sock has been stuck to the wall. Whosever room this is should be ashamed. Donald or Robert or Willie or... Huh? You say it's mine? Oh dear, I knew it looked familiar. And one more. And here's the picture. And it's called Always Sprinkle Pepper. Always sprinkle pepper in your hair. Always sprinkle pepper in your hair. For then if you are kidnapped by a wild barbazoop who sells you to a ragged hag who wants you for her soup, she'll pick you up and sniff you, and then she'll sneeze, achoo, and say, my tot, you're much too hot. I fear you'll never do. And with a shout, she'll throw you out, and you'll run away from there. And soon you will be safe at home, a-sitting in your chair. If you always, 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 always sprinkle pepper in your hair. Well, that's the end of our time together today. I hope you are enjoying the book. It seems to be getting pretty exciting. And I don't know how it ends either, because it's the first time I've read the book. So I hope you enjoy listening to it. Take care of yourselves, and I'll be back again another day. Bye-bye.